5:18, be led by the Spirit, ye are not under the law. So I'm not the most biblically literate person in the world, but that sounds like to me that if you're following God's will, it was okay to break the law. So as I started getting into that a little bit deeper, I found out that during the 1840s, the church, not only did the church have issues with slavery, but they had problems too with they were saying things like, yes, slavery is immoral, but it's not illegal, so therefore it's okay. And then some of the other Baptists said, well, we don't think so, and that's what caused a split. So at this time, at the same time is when the Underground Railroad started gaining steam. And so Hackley had to get involved with that and try to understand, by him being a man of God, if he's helping slaves to escape, he's actually breaking the law. So to understand that, that's where I go back to the scripture that Pressy suggested to me, and that was Galatians 5:1, where it said, steadfast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ has made us free, and not be entangled again with the yoke of bondage. And the way that I would interpret that is, if you're free, period. So that's where it really got difficult for me to understand. So what I had to do was go just a step farther. And as I'm talking to my pastor friends, Jeremiah Hackley told me that the liberation theology came out of this movement. And liberation theology, black liberation theology, that always kind of rang a bell in my mind. And I had to go back to the person who really brought that to light. And this person that really first enlightened me to what black liberation theology was, is when he said that when you start confusing government and God, your allegiance is to government and not to God. And you're in serious trouble because governments fail people, and governments change, and governments lie, and it is not consistent with the will or word of God. And that you're made in the image of God and not in the image of government. And that was spoken by Reverend Jeremiah Wright. And he was called, President Obama's pastor, and he was called a very controversial, hate-mongering pastor, when I see exactly what he was talking about, because to obey the laws, we still be enslaved. So that's what helped split apart the church. But at the time in the 1840s and 1850s, they had some of the craziest laws, such as in 1850, they had the Fugitive Slave Act. And I found out that even though my folks were free, and here in Niles, Michigan, in a free state, the slave catchers could have still come up here and said, okay, let me see your papers. And take the papers and tear them up. Now let me see your papers again. And there you are. You can be taken right back to slavery, because the police officers today are almost doing the same type of a mindset where you're guilty, even if you're not guilty, you're guilty. But the craziest thing, at the time that this church was formed in 1851, the craziest law I could find came out of Virginia. And it wasn't exactly a law, it was a mental disease that slaves caught. And this disease was discovered by Dr. Samuel Cartwright in 1851, and it was called drapetomania, D-R-A-P-E-T-O-M-A-N-I-A. And that was a disease that slaves caught that made them want to escape, made them want to run away. And it was called drapetomania. And the only known cure for that disease was a severe whipping. medical terminology. I mean, it was a real thing. So going back then and before, laws and codes and customs were designed to mess up the minds of black people and confuse them. And but nevertheless, my group got out of there and never looked back. We still have cousins in Virginia, and we're still busy I'm busy making the connections with them because they did stay behind. But nevertheless, even in Indiana was a free state. But nevertheless, the first governor of Indiana in 1800, he was bound and determined to make Indiana back into a slave state. So, and Indiana still has that same type of mindset now. And but nevertheless, they didn't get that done. But all that, in spite of all those obstacles, J.W. Hackley obviously had a strong will, a strong mindset, and they came here to Niles, set their shops up, built the church, and with his 15 children, not only had wives and husbands, and a whole lot of children. And they married other people and created almost a whole quilt across this whole region of Southwest Michigan. There's numerous Hackley firsts here in the Southwest Michigan. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but one over in Benton Harbor, their first corner was a black man, Hackley, George Hackley. But the one that I'm most proud of is Edwin Hackley, who during Reconstruction in 1883, Edwin Hackley, his dad was J.W. Hackley's second oldest son, John Hackley. But nevertheless, he went to University of Michigan Law School in 1883 and became the first black to graduate from the law school, and he was the first black to pass the Michigan bar exam. And a whole bunch of Hackleys were doing things. I mean, they were thriving along with other members. And so that caused them to keep digging more and more and more and seeing who they're married to. And then all of a sudden, I run into people who are associated with Niles, Michigan, and a history project where they want to not only take the sign here that's on the side of the church, the historic marker, but they want to have this whole area with the lodge and the schoolhouse to have a higher federal designation. And I've been driving back and forth to Niles a whole lot over the past few months, and what I'm going to attempt to do is, I know my Hackleys around here, and as I've been finding out other people who they're married to, that gives me a small quilt, and then the meetings I've been attending here at the church, and over at the museum and at the library over here, at a point here real soon, I will have a chance to start interviewing older families here who have long histories. And I know a little bit about the history here, so when these older people start talking about their history, we should be able to build a quilt over this whole Southwest area, because the early families that came here, their aim was, I guess, to go to Canada. So therefore, going across the state, there's a whole lot of Hackleys and Hackley stories, but not just that. All those men who came here at that time, they were all equally industrious. And they weren't looking for a job, they created their own opportunities. And that's what makes the history in this region so unique. When I was at a meeting here a few weeks ago at the library over here, they were sitting there talking about, somehow we should try to find out what makes us so unique here in Niles, what makes this community so unique. And I was listening to these Niles area people talking about this, and for me, being an outsider, it was obvious. You all are just a special breed of people, period. Because the same reason that J.W. Hackley didn't want to go to Indiana back then is why I'm here before you today. It's just a whole different mindset. The people that came into Indiana were looking for jobs, by and large, looking for jobs. The people that came here were looking to create their own opportunities. You know, I mean, it might have been agricultural, but the point is, it's a whole different mindset, and therefore the descendants of them today, it's just a whole different mindset where I saw the video that there was whites there, blacks there, educators, and it was a real neat mix of people really trying to bring not only the history together and show why this area is unique, but there's areas not too far from here where there was perfect harmony between blacks and whites. You know, no problems at all. So my aim is to just help uncover these stories, show the uniqueness of this part of the state, and show really how rich it is and how unique it is. And because I've been trying for years to do the same thing in my hometown in Fort Wayne, and one of the objectives that's listed in their Niles grant proposal actually is they said that they want to, the Niles History Center Committee wants to connect the Niles African American history to the broader region. And that just made my ears just perk right up, you know, because the history of this entire region, actually the history of the whole Great Lakes area, including Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, they all have one thing in common. And believe it or not, it's Fort Wayne, Indiana. Because we have some rivers there in Fort Wayne that during this time, even back to the 1600s, all the furs from the whole region here, to get these furs back to Europe, you had to come through Fort Wayne. Because the river says so, the geography says so. And in 1790, I found that in Fort Wayne, between $4 and $5 million worth of furs were coming through our rivers. Because in Fort Wayne, you could actually, it was said that you could leave New Orleans and go to Montreal from New Orleans. From New Orleans, you go to Montreal and make one stop. And that's in Fort Wayne, where you get out of the water and you gotta walk 7 miles to another river and then go on to Canada. That's how important Fort Wayne was. And it blows my mind to see how the folks in Fort Wayne ignore all that history. But my point is, with all that money coming through Fort Wayne, yes, that's why George Washington and the boys had to attack. And Fort Wayne has the unique distinction of killing the most white people in U.S. history that were trying to kill the Indians to take the land. But anyway, that's just, so as I started looking at that, and after all those wars were over with, my point is, they signed a treaty called the Treaty of Greenville. And that was signed in 1795. And that treaty is what gave, Chief Little gave all this land here, including Niles, to Anthony Wayne, and he's the one who closed the deal, and now we're all part of one region, and that's part of Niles history. And the longer I've been involved with genealogy, I found that it is not really that difficult to trace your own family and see how your own family ties in to the growth of American history. Because it does. Because most of your ancestors were from the South, and they came north for a reason. And that was to escape slavery, most likely. And as they were leaving the South, I mean, they were doing so for a reason. I mean, all this stuff ties together. And my aim is to make it all make sense, help write it, and this church is going to be the centerpiece because this is where the action happened, and that's really what I want to do. So thank you very much.